Hey everyone, we're on the final leg of the C10 project before it gets out of the garage for car show season. To wrap this project up, we're finishing the bed in SEM Professional Bed Liner. There's a fair amount of work to do, so follow along with the links in the description. All right, let's get this thing done. Okay, so before we can jump into the bed, we need to straighten out these wheel tubs first. They've got a lot of wear and tear over the years and are a bit banged up. We have to straighten them out to get them installed because we need the bed fully assembled before we spray the liner. I start by working on the obvious bends and tackling the major dents with a hammer and dolly. Conveniently, they were previously painted black, so that paint works as a guide coat as I move around them. Once they're straight enough, I feather edge all the peeling paint and cracked body filler. These are factory tubs that have been raised with a sort of sheet metal skirt, so they still function while providing clearance for the rear wheels. All right, so we're getting ready to reinstall these wheel tubs before we apply the bed liner to the inside of the C10 bed. It had some damage, we sanded that out with 80 grit, made sure it's nice and smooth. We also found some rust from where these things were rubbing up against the bed over the last decade. For example, on the top right there, you can see where under the bed rail it had been vibrating, so it had worn through the top coat, started rusting. To combat that, we sanded it out. Now we're gonna go ahead and hit it with a little bit of fast edge. That's gonna make sure this rust doesn't come back and our coating will last a really long time. Apply it. Let that sit for about a half an hour or so. Once finished, we neutralize and wipe it off with pre-painting prep. Before we can install these wheel tubs, first we need to address this area. Basically, we need to scuff it, shoot it with rust encapsulator, make sure that rust, dirt, debris don't end up rotting it out once we no longer have access. All right, so we got a bed back on here. Our next step to getting this to bed liner is hitting the whole bottom with the Contour SCT and getting this thing ready for some rust encapsulator. Because the bed is grooved, I use a combination of the narrow and wide 40 grit cookie style wheels to get it stripped down. The wide wheel is great for getting all the tops of the ridges, and the narrow wheel works well in the valleys. I even got creative and cut down a narrow wheel spacer so I could run 2 narrow wheels, which was the perfect width for the valleys. So don't be afraid to experiment a bit. While stripping the bed, we discovered some rot on the driver's side rear bed pillar that we couldn't ignore. The best method, if available, is always to cut out and replace the rotten metal, so that's what we did here. I start by grinding the surface and marking out how far I need to remove the old metal. Next, I take the 3-inch adjustable head cutoff wheel and cut out a square section. This will make it easy to make a replacement piece. Then I mark my new filler piece on some fresh sheet metal and cut out using the electric metal cutting shears. After a little bit of fine grinding for fitment, we're happy with the filler piece and ready to weld it in. The MIG 180 makes light work of this part, and I just work my way around the piece, going from opposite corner to avoid warping it. Then the grinder helps me finish it up. As we know, this is getting finished in bed liner, so we can leave it in metal and move on without having a need to apply any body filler. The last step before applying our new coatings is scuffing the sides and front wall to make sure the rust encapsulator has adequate tooth. We hit as much as we can with 180 grit on a DA sander and then finish with the coarse scuff pad. All right, so now we're into painting territory. As with any paint job, the prep is the most important part. We blow the bed out and then wipe the entire thing down with pre-painting prep so our surface is free of any dirt and oil. Next, we can tape up the bed so we're only applying the rust encapsulator where we want it to go. To make this a bit simpler, we're going to roll it on rather than spraying. Rolling these coatings is beneficial because we won't have to spray it in a booth, it's less masking, and it's something everyone can replicate in the driveway. We're planning on using OptiFlow on this as well, so we used the paint tray, liner, and roller from that kit for the Rust Encapsulator Plus. This stuff's great because it can be applied over rust, bare metal, and properly abraded paint. Pretty much everything we have in this bed. The only other interesting thing to note here is that when you're doing a bed, you have to do the sides first and then move on to the floor. Otherwise, you'll have a hard time being able to reach everything, especially on full sizes. All right, so we're back. We let the rust encapsulator dry overnight. Now we can go ahead and apply our epoxy primer. We're gonna do that because the bed liner that we're using calls for either being sprayed over paint or epoxy. We weren't sure how it would react with the rust encapsulator, so we figured always best to follow the manufacturer's recommendations. We're gonna start by doing cut-in with our 2K Aerospray epoxy, and then follow that up with our OptiFlow. We rolled on the rust encapsulator, it looked really good, so I'm really excited about the results we're gonna get from our black OptiFlow primer. Let's jump in. A lot of you have probably seen our 2K Aerosprays before. There's two separate components in each can, and once you puncture it, they mix. And now you have the same top coat you would spray from an HVLP gun. We knock the cut-in out super quick and can start mixing up the OptiFlow primer. We're using black, so if our bed liner is light, it won't be super noticeable. But we also offer it in white and traditional gray as well, so it can fit the needs of your project. We mix this at 4:1 with the hardener and start rolling. Same thing as the previous step, starting with the walls and then moving on to the floor. Unfortunately, the time lapse on this one isn't quite as satisfying, but I can show you a cool before and after. All right guys, it's been a couple days. Our epoxy primer's got nice and hard. We can go ahead and move on to the next step. We're gonna give it some tooth by scuffing it with these red scuff pads. Then we can go ahead and apply our bed liner. All right, and with that, we can move on to bed liner. Our bed's all scuffed, so we blow up the booth and mask up the bed one final time for bed liner. This is the same process for any spray job, except bed liner gets sprayed at 45 to 90 psi, so you need to be a little more careful with your tape edges to prevent blow-throughs. You may also need to make a couple decisions on where you want your bed liner to start and stop. For example, I wanted the inside of the tailgate to be protected, but still wanted it to have a bit of green around the edges. Just make sure anything being sprayed is scuffed properly. With the truck all taped up, we can mix our SEM Professional Bed Liner at 4:1 with the included extra large mixing cup. Just be sure whatever you're mixing will be sprayed in the 20-minute pot life window. Pot life refers to how long a sprayable coating will last before it kicks and starts to harden. Bed liners are typically sprayed through a Schutz gun, which is a siphon feed style paint gun. We use the Eastwood undercoating gun for this job. It's nice because you can adjust the fan on the front to help you get your desired texture. We dialed ours in and ran it at 60 psi. Note that another difference is this has a circular spray pattern instead of a normal HVLP fan, which definitely takes a little getting used to. We started applying, and after a minute or two, we got the hang of it. This gets 3 coats with 15-minute flash times in between. We found going on the drier side gave us the texture we were looking for. After 3 coats, we let it sit for an hour before untaping for the final reveal. Man, this thing looks awesome. We are super happy about the results. The wheel tubs, notch cover, gas door, and tailgate came out flawless. I'll admit, I thought this would hide some of the blemishes on the bed a bit more than it did, but that's okay. It's a massive improvement over how this thing came in here. I'll have no problem tossing some camping chairs and a cooler in the back to carry them to the next car show. Well, that wraps up most of the work we had planned on the C10. For now, anyways. Check out the full playlist to see how to bring your old car or truck back to life. And to learn more about any of the products and tools you saw here, head over to eastwood.com.